Hello, my name is Håkon Stene, and I'm a performing musician who collaborate quite a lot with living composers. For this podcast, I invited my dear friend, composer Erik Daehlin, to chat about our own collaborations, the last of which took place about 6 years ago. On behalf of both of us, I'd like to thank Jennifer Torrance and Roberto Maqueda for inviting us to contribute to the 10statements.com website, as well as to the larger project of sharing one's experience on co-creative work within so-called new music and experimental performance practices. When getting the invitation from Roberto, I first thought about Erik because he is a composer who has been working for almost a couple of decades now with methods borrowed from dance and theater. That is process-based, in a space, with other human beings, employing theatrical props, visuals, text, movement, light, etc., as opposed to a more traditional method of writing notes on a piece of paper before presenting it to a performer. What I find interesting about Erik's approach to composition is his openness to sharing ideas and his willingness to engage with and include the performer's personality and biography into his own creative process, so that the end result is a balanced reflection of all the parties involved. Erik and I met on Zoom in June 2021. Our plan for the chat was to warm up by reading through and discussing each of Jennifer's and Roberto's statements before starting to record. But we unconsciously derailed from that plan pretty quickly and actually forgot to record our warm-up. So, as you'll hear, we begin pretty much in the middle of a conversation with no specific build-up or plan and continue rather intuitively for about 40 minutes. Since we're both just musicians, we touch upon some topics that are quite frankly beyond our areas of competence, such as copyright law and its history. But we hope the listener can take that as an impulse to find out more, as we ourselves attempt to do. So, we apologize for the lack of structure, and not least for all the wrong grammar. English is only a second or third language for us. But we still hope that some of you will enjoy listening to our little conversation. Collaboration in the arts and other fields are as much or more present than ever. We talked about that.
But we can talk about that. We can talk about it more because I think it's, to me, it is a claim to say that. And inside that claim, there is a kind of idea that before there wasn't that much collaboration. And that is, of course, not true. So, as I see it, I think that there's some ideology built into this that maybe needs to be talked about, and also how the modern artist or the composer arose through the 1800 or maybe 500 years of history of arts. So it's so much to say about that, isn't it?
Yes, but can you elaborate what you mean on ideology? You mean a sort of democratic ideology that performers then are kind of forcing their way into the to the picture, as it were, into the framework of artistic creation, where maybe the historical image is there more of kind of bystanders and receive this holy piece of paper with some magical notation on, which has come down to the composer from the heavens, and then he or she interprets that. That would be the historical model, which maybe this claim is based on. And
or it's based on the that I'm sure we'll know that lots of music was written or was created either by the composer playing himself or herself, or together with a musician or musicians. But the musicians, the performers, was through the ages left out, because nobody remembers. Or maybe you have some written sources that this, and we have lots of this, of course, but we also have lots of pieces that we do not know who premiered the piece. So it's become don't you agree? It's a kind of inherited idea of craftsmanship and ownership that kind of evolves into the score somehow.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well. And history remembers the names of the copyright holders, which is at the front of the score, or at the bottom of the end of the score, rather, the signature.
No, I mean, if you play a piece by any composer who lived 200-300 years ago, the history of all the musicians who have been participating in this piece are kind of left out.
No, I remember in my PhD reading and writing quite a lot about John Cage and his collaborators, and they were all kind of walking around on the junkyard finding bits and pieces, and finding these everyday objects, all the implements. And at the end, he notated everything and put it into the form of a score, the shape of a score, and gets the royalties and gets the kind of historical credibility. So it doesn't reflect the entire situation, the entire context.
Maybe if we look into the quite short history of modern dance, maybe that becomes a bit more clear, because we can see now that there's lots of dance performances that start to include the names of the one, or if the performance is done again after, let's say, 10 or 20 years, the names of the dancers who participated together with the choreographer, who has kind of a shared authorship to this dance piece, is in the program with their names. So that's a very interesting, maybe it's an interesting comparison coming to these issues. And also, one thing that came to my mind is that I talked to a lawyer who wrote a thesis about copyright in Europe, connected to music and also performing arts. And she said that there was a lot of discussion earlier about including the performer's rights into the copyright. But it ended up not doing that. But it was quite close that we did that in Europe.
Okay, so that means there is some kind of, when you speak about the politics of the ideology rather baked into copyright, I'm sure there is some kind of two parties or two or more agents or parties kind of doing their protectionistic negotiations, right, on behalf of their agents. So I'm sure you have the composers, management, or editors, publishers doing the negotiations on behalf of the composer in order for him or her to make a living, etc. So I'm sure it would be super interesting to have a kind of a law historian talk about this, how copyrights within the arts has developed since the idea of the artist as an independent actor and not like an employee for some royalty or something.
Yeah, and also it depends on which level we want to talk about this. But of course, there's some kind of, at least I feel that there is a kind of inherent idea of the composer. Yeah, you can say as a genius, but also as it has some imperialistic qualities being a composer that or artist, you could say. And there's people talking about this, that the establishment of museums and how art became art through the Renaissance and further on, is of course linked to the European idea of the New World, and to take. And I think composers, also me, we take, and we are, you could say we inherit this idea, and we live out the idea of being curious in the world. And that has different qualities, and one of them is being curious in a way that you take possession of something. And that could also be the performer. and I brought to you this quote. Can I take that? Because I think it's really interesting. Because for me, and probably many other composers and musicians and performers, for example, Georges Chapargis is a composer who's been working quite close with his musicians and performers. And in this film from, I think it's 2006, which is a documentary about him, he states or makes a remark about this this work, and then he talks about it to, let the personality of the performer resonate in his piece, and kind of, as I remember it, he talks about how to kind of induce the capacity and the musical personality of the performer into the piece. And we know this quite well, how he worked. And quite early in that documentary, he's described it, and this is a quote, and describe it as a vampirism. And to me, this is a very interesting paradox, because I think I know what he means. But on the other hand, there is an idea of making art out of a person, of a musician, which is also highly problematic in a way. Maybe. I can't answer on behalf of a performer or a composer, but to me that is very... it's interesting and a bit provoking. And I think I also belong to this tradition somehow. And I feel that through the work you and me did in... is it 10 years ago now?
We've done it twice. We did it once in 2009, we did a piece, and in 2014 we did another one. Yeah. I felt that I wanted to work in a similar way, but not take the ownership of that piece. Right, and this is what I wanted to ask you about in this talk, actually, how you, in your own practice, you have kind of designed the pieces around the person you collaborate with in a very biographical, personal kind of sense. So it's almost to the degree that you could maybe argue that it doesn't make sense for other people to perform them. And so you, in a way, you paint yourself into a corner as a composer, because in terms of the music being distributed around and kind of beyond the performer it is written for. That's a strong limitation in terms of getting a piece performed by more than one interpreter, and thereby also maybe creating this catalog of images or impressions and different readings of a score. But I mean, you don't even use a score always. You kind of work with the space or a certain acoustic or certain materials out of a person's life. So in your case, the score is just maybe one of the agents at play, because you use several kind of media to represent the final product or the final piece. Yeah, I don't know if I paint myself into the corner, but of course, I don't know. Contemporary music and written music is so based on many performances, or you want the piece to be performed, of course. But why? Or why this kind of universal? Of course, it's fantastic that a piece could be shared between many performers. But to me, that doesn't feel that important, I have to admit. So, okay, can you explain why? I'm sure that it's exciting that every performance is potentially radically new, and not just on a kind of micro level, but on a more fundamental level. Maybe it reflects a bit where I come from, because I grew up playing in a band, for example.
So it means playing in a band means that you are contributing into this collaborative field, and you have a strong ownership in that band. And I feel it's a bit the same. It feels very strange that somebody performs a piece somewhere on the other side of the world. It's fantastic and very interesting, but also very detached.
Disconnected
somehow.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense somehow.
Yeah, that resonates with me. This kind of band identity and this kind of the working ethos of of a band, do-it-yourself thing. You develop it collaboratively, and if somebody is making a cover of that collaboration, that's kind of a fake, or it's not a real thing, or not so interesting. I mean, and that's actually the reality in the pop rock world. I mean, people make music, and if at least in the world of pop covers, that's the original remains the original. There might be thousands of cover versions, but they are certainly much lower down on the hierarchy, and that's different from the classic world of classical music, where any given interpretation, whether it's the 3,500th interpretation of a Beethoven symphony by the Berlin Phil or one of those high-status orchestras, it's still high up in the hierarchy. It's a copy of a copy of a copy in a kind of art world terminology, because there will be many other interpretations sounding the same, but it's still just one step from the composer. And the score. But
it's an interesting question about this. Can anybody else do the piece? Maybe it's at least two, maybe not answers to that, but for me, it's sometimes a question of, is it possible to make some material from that piece which kind of seems very personal or very close, and open it up for somebody else to go into it and do it. But on the other hand, I guess it's more interesting if people get inspired by it and do something on their own,
right?
So to say.
Could that be to stay a little bit longer in your practice? Could that be a model that you could imagine developing? Like you have the piece isn't specifically about the person, but you have a certain requirements that have to be fulfilled in order to realize a piece. So you have to include personal history, personal props from your own childhood or whatever. So the piece is more about a certain outer framework and not about the actual content. That the content has to be filled in. Performer has to fill in the blanks with his or hers personal belongings and history, and
But then there kind of arises a paradox for me, because I think for me at least, and maybe a lot of other composers and artists, the form and the content arises and develops at the same time. So when you kind of take out the content and leave a form which somebody should go into, I'll guess that also the form has to reshape, and then there's a question of what's left of the kind of original piece. And then if it's nothing left, then it doesn't make sense to do the piece, if you see what I mean.
I see that point. That sounds like a sane argument. But I mean, I guess in your case, one would have to look at each piece anew. And I mean, in the pieces we've made, there's a certain formal development which could represent, you could represent that in a score somehow. The degree to which you fill in personal content or content which is already defined is maybe half. And so I mean, at least you could claim 50% ownership to a score of a certain kind that you could distribute. But maybe this is just like a fantasy. Another thing I thought about with regards to the pop rock cover song phenomenon. So that's, people do that only when the songs are really iconic. You don't really make covers of stuff that isn't really referential, or that's not always true, of course. But I mean, I don't have good stats on this, but I have a certain feeling the most covered songs in the world are like the really iconic songs, like Lennon, McCartney, and that kind of thing. For you, it's not like you hold yourself up there with those iconic composers, but why do you fear reproduction? couldn't that be interesting? Couldn't that bring something to the table that you didn't expect? Or
Absolutely. But I don't know. It's not new thoughts to me, but now it feels like it's a bit new to me. So I don't know how to answer that. But maybe it's because I don't feel the big, there's a why doing it, why do that. And also, you have to somehow be interested in making a score or making a piece. For example, the piece that we did, either of us, I think, felt any interest in going back and kind of trace what we did and notated it, because we didn't do that. And for me, that's a kind of answer that none of us were kind of interested in making that into a score. And why didn't we do that?
maybe the score is more of a concept that what you actually could publish is a concept. So it's not a do this, do that kind of score, but a concept like gather personal information, etc., A, B, C, D. You can wrap that up in 10 points, and then that's your score. That's your piece. You could kind of copyright the concept, and rather than the detail.
But maybe I don't feel that interested in that. I remember I did this theater piece by Samuel Beckett once called Quad. I think Beckett did a handful of pieces. He called them actes sans parole, or pieces without words. And this Quad is a quite precise, or more or less precise, description of 4 people walking in different patterns together. And I remember we were talking a lot about, who owns this piece, or what is our interpretation in this piece, and what is his work. And you can say absolutely that his concept and his description is the work. But going further from that, I had, of course, long discussions with the copyright firm representing Beckett, because I wanted to divide this piece into smaller parts. And in the beginning, that was not possible. And you going through lots of stages about this, and then you also talk to yourself about what is a piece of art, and how do you work with it. And it was interesting because the piece is very much, but also very little,
right?
In some way.
I also remember at one point you guys, this ensemble you played in some years back, Ning, you were kind of early on working with reinterpretations of pieces. I remember you doing Staatsteater by Kagel. You did Nixon in China on the
on the beach, Einstein on the beach.
Einstein on the beach in the opera house, new built in the kind of shores of the Oslo Opera, and you did a super reductionistic version. And you also quarreled a lot with the publisher on that one. You did like a lot, three-piece ensemble singing.
Yeah, and we were not allowed to do it, but we did it anyhow. We shouldn't say that loud. But of course, in that piece, it's lots of music. But we were just 4 performers, so of course it was.
Yeah, and you were like editing with like really a rough cut, I would say. But still, it had a super nice quality. You were in some kind of beach chairs on the down by the water, with little Mickey Mouse keyboards and sunglasses,
and trying to sing,
counting to 8 or 9. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So
Anyways, I broke you off in the middle of a thought.
No. So big questions.
What's kind of bugging your mind nowadays about collaborations? Because you just finished a 4-year fellowship. Could you tell us a little bit about those processes? Where you in your PhD project, you just finished 4 pieces, which included, I think, 4 different solo performers, and I know that some of them went the way you planned and some did not, and maybe you're willing to elaborate a little bit about those experiences.
I will try. So first, I have to be a bit frank about the idea of collaboration. I'm very to me it's a dilemma because maybe it's also because I grew up as an only child, so I have this, and many of us maybe have that. I have this very kind of split personality in a way that I really want to work on my own and control, to maybe decide myself. But on the other hand, I feel a very strong desire to be with people and also get into discussions and try to work things through together and get other perspectives presented and discussed that I can't find myself. So this collaborative need is very kind of feels in two ways, if you see what I mean.
Right, and when you say you want to avoid compromise, isn't the compromise like a constant part of life, like on a daily basis? Like you make compromises constantly. So
absolutely,
it's just it would be weird if you would just be very hermetic about your music making.
Yeah,
since you're part of a society, a part of a family, a part of
yeah, absolutely. But sometimes maybe we can all feel that inside our practice or inside art you can do something which is very different from ordinary life, or that you don't need to follow the rules of everyday life. But I totally agree, and I think
exactly. And maybe in traditional art production, if the creation, if the ideas are created hermetically or in a kind of solitude with a composer, and the compromise happens when the first sound hits the room, like the first sound waves, and then you have all sorts of acoustic things, and you kind of shape the acoustic in order to, and therein lies the compromise. But with your case, it's like from the first day, basically, we met, or you meet with the person you're going to write a piece together, when you basically drink coffee for 4 days and talk about where to go. And so it's kind of enters the process much earlier. And so it's, I mean, maybe you never really get to enjoy that solitude in a way. I mean, you take some material back and you shape it, then that's your, and many premises are already decided before you go into composing, right?
Yeah, and since you mentioned this 4 years of collaborative processes that I did, I feel like I think I've become more conscious about the different qualities of making art, either by myself or together. And I see that, for example, now in the piece that I'm going to do, I really don't want to do anything before we meet together, because sometimes it's very hard to start to collaborate if you have been working on your own for a quite long time, because at least me, then I have been making some paths and some questions which I feel it's hard to share, because maybe I already decided where to go, so to say. So doing a collaboration, and that's the tricky part about doing music, I think, because there's unbalance in the time we use. If you think about the composer and the musician, a lot of time, and then we come back to the politics of this, of course, but a lot of time the composer has more money to work. And that means I can work longer than you,
right,
as a performer, for example.
Yeah.
So you know about this. But
you've been quite open to sharing those money, haven't you? Like this, in my experience, you were kind of giving me, I don't remember, but it was like a cut, and that was really generous in a way. I didn't expect it, but you felt that was the right thing, and so So that's maybe a model that it was kind of fronted from the composer side, and I didn't ask for it. So I really appreciated that you said, okay, we've done this collaboratively, you get, I don't know, 30% or something.
Yeah, but I think that's really important. But then it's a question of to build a project with the fundings, which is shared kind of equal corresponds to how we work. But that's hard because a lot of fundings are connected to composing or the composer.
There is this old model in a way that's still maybe it needs a bit of reshaping, but I know that it works differently within different genres. I know that in pop music, many people discuss the ownership of a certain note or the transition to the refrain, whether that is 1% to this person and 1% to the other person, and it's kind of down to handing out percentage. And in folk music, where I collaborate more, the rule is the person who has composed the tune gets the commission, the royalties, and the other people get arrangement. If you perform, you make a chordal progression or a percussion arrangement to that tune, you still get only arrangement. You don't get composition. Whereas if you would notate all of that, let's say you improvised in the room together and you notated it in a kind of more traditional compositional way, that would suffice as a part. So you would get a part of the composition. But in folk music, you only get arrangement because the tune is like the leading star. So
yeah,
it's differently. Yeah. So actually, I didn't write one single note in your score. We just shared ideas, and then you went back home and composed with those ideas. So it's more like maybe the ideas, some of them were mine, but all the treatment you gave to those ideas was yours. So you were really on the generous side there. And I also have other experiences where that was really different. We workshopped and I gave some of my ideas, and then this composer went back and composed with those ideas, and that was 100%. The copyright belongs 100% to that composer. So I mean, people had different politics, but I see there's a need for a debate on this, and maybe a way of reworking the juridical parts of how this could be funded and shared.
Yeah, but also absolutely. But also the consciousness about who we are and what we. I mean, you have a very strong identity as a musician, and it will always make you into a co-composer or co-creator, in my opinion. So, for example, in our piece, when we talked about using the guitar, the way you play that guitar was absolutely yours.
Yeah.
So I arranged some of the chords, but I didn't discuss with you how to do that chords. You did it yourself.
Yeah.
And it will make no sense for me to. So it's a kind of, because we are doing other composers' music inside of this piece. If I then took ownership of that, it was totally absurd.
Yeah, we did a cover song, right?
Yeah, we did that.
Whiter Shade of Pale by Procol Harum, and so it's rather an arrangement.
Iconic works.
Yeah. Certainly, it's one of my favorite songs.
But I think there's a lot of, to me, it's a lot of free labor going on, and inside an art. So. It seems like in the conversation we have now, we are kind of how to say it. We're tipping from the maybe the artistic realm of working and back and forth to the more the questions of copyright, the questions of law, you could say. So I guess that from the law perspective, I would say that there's lots of free labor going on. From musicians to composers all the time.
There is, yeah, I can.
And I think yes. We have very kind of open minds, but also with critical minds. We have to look into that and talk about that because I think it's of course sometimes it's really a question of money. But it's also a question of dignity and the idea of a kind of shared world, I guess, that we respect each other.
Yeah. But I think this will really function differently in a sort of institutionalized world of music making. For instance, like in an orchestra, which is a huge. I mean, if you would. Ask every member of an orchestra, so 120 people or anywhere between 70 and 120 people to contribute collaboratively, I guess that would be a problem. But if you have this within this kind of do-it-yourself world that we operate, I think that debate is just overdue. Yeah.
But I think it's a question of time. And then since you mentioned this artistic PhD I took, at least one of the or two or maybe three of these pieces I made, I worked with the performer or the I don't know, it doesn't make sense actually to talk about it in performer or composer, but a kind of devised situation that we devised together. And the kind of crucial point is how much time do we have together? And for example, in one of the pieces, we were on the floor all the time together, and I barely worked alone. And that then it's a question of maybe it's more similar to contemporary theater performance practice, where you work in a black box for weeks together. And maybe it's not so much to do about contemporary music as such.
Right. And did you then still fix these ideas in a score format, or
no?
So that piece just exists as a documentation somewhere.
All of these pieces are not distributed. So now you're living in Germany, and I think there's some historical differences, the power and the money that goes through the publishers is maybe very different in Germany compared to Norway, for example. So I don't know how you look upon this, but there's certainly some editors, publishers that have a great take into this and how we work in and distributing scores.
I mean, I think all the big publishing houses in contemporary music, like Universal, Berenreiter, Breikhoff and Hertel, Ricordi, are still, basically based on the old model of, or Willem Hansen in Copenhagen, and the old model of like the composer has the ownership, and they're still very much based around the institutions like ensembles, symphony ensembles and orchestras. Of course, chamber music, and they have and Salabert, of course, in Paris, where you rent material. You still rent the material, and you have to send it back after the performance. It's kind of expensive, and that's how they, how they keep up. But I see, for many years now, composers have their own publishing system where they just email or they charge a small amount and just hand you a PDF. So I think I'm curious to see how this works in the next 30, 40, 50 years.
Absolutely, yeah.
If they're still just keeping this kind of museum catalog of, back catalog of old music that's still being played, and whether the younger composers, younger generations just do it themselves and email stuff maybe for a small charge. Yeah,
but the problem is that, for me, I have to think through this because I can do this because I can get fundings by the Norwegian state to do these pieces. But if it wasn't like that, I had to find somewhere another way of doing it to actually get some money to do the projects, and then the question arises in another way.
So maybe you belong to a lineage where the composers' associations have had a very strong kind of union, and they have secured a lot of rights for the composers in Scandinavia, as probably one of the few areas in the world where you can actually make a living composing art music, which is a rare thing, right, on a global scale. But that's probably thanks to the union and all the people who have kind of did all the political lobbyism and all the political work in order to have those systems. There's like an XY axis, and you find the amount you can apply for based on duration and lineup, and that's sort of a kind of waterproof system. I wonder what you feel about that, thinking about all the colleagues around the world who do not have that system at their hands.
I think but on the other hand, you could say that when you talk about the Composers Union, I will say that it still favors artists, composers working in the realm of symphony orchestra or established musical ensembles. So if you go across that and do something which is more experimental or smaller or different, then it's still it is a kind of struggle to get somebody to play it and show it, of course, but also to get them. And I'm not complaining, but so I think the structure is quite built around some institutions.
Conservative, it's the word, I guess. Yeah.
Maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, it's very, very built around institutions and classical formats in a way. Is there anything in conclusion? Any remark you felt you need to record? I have to have this thing said.
No, I felt maybe that isn't it Charles Ives or something? I think it's Charles Ives who said something about that bank people, they talk about art, and artists, they talk about money. Yeah, maybe, or something like that. I felt maybe we talked a bit too much about this.
Well, we
issue, but
we did talk a lot about the ideology before, so we just had the last 10 minutes maybe we talked about the more boring, mundane stuff.
The boring stuff, because the really important stuff and interesting stuff is the way we work and what we want to do with it. Yeah.
But on a positive note, I want to say that to me, it's become less and less interesting to collaborate offhand and to just have a composer send me a score in my inbox, and like I haven't had any part of the process. I haven't collaborated passively for a number of years, and that really doesn't interest me so much anymore. I love to be a part of the process and to kind of give feedback and to be to have insight into the process and see how the piece develops and everything like that, in order to have this feeling of, if it's not a juridical ownership, it's a kind of emotional ownership to a piece, and to how to make it special and how to make it personal. It's more and more about that for me, and not just to get handed the score and then just to play the notes. I really don't care about that anymore.
But how do you feel then about our piece? Because you can turn it around and say that, okay, so you and me, Håkon, we did this piece in 2015. It was called Absence is the Only Real, and it was based on biographical notes and material, and the absence of our fathers. So what will then happen if another composer came and said, hey, can we do something about our fathers? How will you respond to that question? Because
I wouldn't care. I wouldn't care. It's the piece was so personal, and there's no one else has our fathers, and everything was about. I mean, in a sense, everybody has a father, and no one's the same. So it can be as universal and as personal as it wants to be. And I think our piece wasn't universally about being a father or having fathers. It was more about our fathers that is respectively dead or absent. So my father is dead and yours is alive but not very present in your life. So I mean, in a way it thematized something universal to the specific and personal. So I mean, there's nothing, I don't see anything you think in terms of like a plagiarism. There's nothing going on there, I think.
Could we do this piece again?
You mean remake the piece? I'm not sure. And for me, it was a beautiful moment in my own career, as it were. And we played it maybe, I don't know, 3 times, 5 times. I have no idea. And then when you told me you had to clean your storage and you threw all the props, I was kind of sad, because it meant that piece it doesn't exist anymore. It exists as a memory and hardly as a documentation, because it's really hard to document. So it's I get very nostalgic about those things, because it's like the mixtape you made when you were 15, you know, that somehow you have all these memories connected to. And so there's actually one of the pieces I feel strongly about in my kind of whole repertoire. It's like a family member in a way, because it's impossible to reproduce, and based on our memories and emotions and whatnot. It doesn't make sense to reproduce on record or on video or in a score or what have you. So yeah, I really love to do more of those kinds of collaborations, in which the medium, the instrumentation, everything is really taken from our own lives.
Yeah, that's interesting.
We can end there.